with Dr. Sonjay Dutta Roy, Professor and Head of the Department English and Modern European Languages at University of Allahabad, India. He has more than 35 years of teaching experience and teaching and research experience. Sir has several research papers in renowned peer-reviewed journals. He is also a coordinator for media studies and for Center for Theatre and Film Studies at University of Allahabad. Apart from this, Professor Roy was also UGC visiting professor in 2008 at Jadavpur University, Kolkata. He was also associated as a Fulbright's visiting scholar at University of California, Berkeley, USA in 2004. From 2001 to 2003, he was associate fellow at Indian Institute of Advanced Studies, Rashtrapati Niwas, Shimla. Today, Professor Roy will speak on the session, Negotiating Between Languages and Cultures, English Studies Today. I welcome you, sir. Over to you.
Thank you, Surabhi. It's a pleasure for me to be here today and speak in front of so many people whom I have not even met actually, and whom I perhaps, you see, hopefully in the future I will meet somewhere, right? I will share with you some of my concerns about the changing paradigms of literature teaching that I have been noting over these years. I have about 40 years of experience as a professor of English literature. I don't teach language, but language, of course, is associated with literature. So it is an ancillary. It has to be there. So when I began teaching literature, English literature, it was very strictly what we call British literature. Because you see, Allahabad University is more than 100 years old, and the colonial legacy is very, very strong. So the syllabus that we were teaching at that time was almost 100% British literature. But you see, over the years, I have noted certain major paradigm shifts in the concept of what is to be taught in an English literature course. I have myself been instrumental in remolding the syllabus in our university to include over the years Indian literature in the vernacular languages which have been translated into English, English literature written in India in English, American literature, new literatures from Australia, New Zealand, Sri Lanka, Africa, and other places, Commonwealth countries. We have had a lot of things introduced now, which makes it, perhaps you see, the British literature course now is only about maybe 30% of the syllabus. The remaining 70% is other literatures, new literatures in the English language from the different countries and places in the world. Now, this is a major paradigm shift that has happened and is happening in the teaching of English literature today. It cannot be taken lightly. This is something, which is part of the opening of the mind to world culture. And here I note that the English language is the negotiating language between cultures. What is important here, and which is the point that I will be trying to make over maybe about half an hour to 45 minutes that I speak to you, is that when we are talking of a negotiating language between literatures that belong to different cultures, literatures that have come out of different languages in different cultures, the attitude that has to be very strictly there in our mind is a totally non-hierarchical attitude. Because only when the attitude is non-hierarchical, when every language and every culture equates equally without one being superior to the other, it's only then that the truest negotiation is possible in literature, teaching and understanding. So with this in mind, that it has to be a non-hierarchical negotiation between languages, cultures, and literatures, and which is where the teacher of English literature and English language has to maintain that democratic attitude and stance. Because this has been a problem in literary studies from a long, long time. There have been languages and cultures which have assumed a proportion of greater importance than other languages and literatures. Now, that is a very sad fact which we have to counter today. And that, I feel, is the major new paradigm in the teaching of language and literature in English today in India. So I personally feel that this entire development that has happened, you see, that we have moved from the strictly British element of English literature and English language teaching to the Indianization, to a understanding of the fact, you see, that the language and the literature in English has moved from the stronghold of the British into the hands of the Commonwealth, into the hands of the vernacular literatures, you see, is an important fact which we have to acknowledge today. The major challenge to in literary studies has been the challenge of what has been called nativism. Now, I have to clarify right at the beginning that I am not a nativist, nor am I going to propagate the idea of the purist nativist stance. I am a person who has always been for hybridization, where we are able to negotiate, to bring cultures into states of understanding, where we are assuming, as I said in the beginning, you see, a non-hierarchical attitude. You see, when the Sanskrit language was an important language in our country, we must remember that that was the time when it was the highest in the hierarchy of all Indian languages. And therefore, you see, the Brahminical element was very, very strong. You see, as the other languages became prominent, you see, that stronghold of Sanskrit started breaking. And other vernacular languages started assuming importance. From marginalization, they entered into the center of discussions and negotiations. Similarly, you see, when the Britishers were here, you see, the English language replaced Sanskrit in the hierarchy, you see, and became one of the top languages in the hierarchy. And the literature that was born out of that language, again, was the top literature in the hierarchy. But then over the years, we have noted, you see, how, you see, the challenge from the vernacular cultures and languages of whatever nation where the English language was prominent or English literature was prominent, how that challenge, you see, slowly in its assertion started bringing other literatures and languages into prominence, and that too through the medium of the language itself, through the English language itself. Now that is the point that I'm trying to make. So here I will begin with a very simple kind of a binary that existed in the identity that we see in India even today. You see, and that is that simplistic binary. I am purposely using the word simplistic because you see later this binary becomes more complex. Let us take two figures. prominent figures who determined the Indian identity and also to a large extent the Indian culture. One is somebody like Jawaharlal Nehru. Nehru was an Indian, but he was an anglicized Indian. He was extremely comfortable with the English language. In fact, he was so comfortable with the English language that he wrote several books in English. And today, when we look at what he wrote, we realize the literary value of his ability, his ability to write in English. You see, he was a good writer in English. And had he not been a politician, maybe he would have been one of the most prominent writers in English in India. But you see, that got clouded by his political ambitions, and therefore he became a politician. I am not sort of making any statements against that, but what I am trying to say is that when we read something like the discovery of India, we have to remember that here he is writing as an anglicized Indian who is comfortable with the English language to a large extent. And he is trying to find his Indian identity. And there he goes in a voyage of discovery. And that is why he calls it Discovery of India. A voyage of discovery where he tries to correlate with the masses in India, the different people of India, the different cultures in India, the different languages of India. It's like a journey of discovery. And it is that journey that he records in the Discovery of India, where he feels that there is a gap between him and the masses, which he wants to bridge. And he tries to bridge it through the language, where he speaks, writes in English, but he's talking about the various peoples of India, the different kind of vernacular cultures that exist, you see, the myths, the mythology, the epics of India, you see, and the various philosophical treatises of India, the various philosophies that emerge from India. He is trying to understand all that, to get deep into it so that you see he is able to correlate the anglicized self and the vernacular self. And the negotiating language is English, which is a language which has that ability to negotiate, because in India, you see, it is free of the kind of things, which you have problems with, that when you say that this is the most important language, somebody says, no, no, this other language is more important. If you take any of the vernacular languages and say that this is the most important language, some other language will say, no, 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 this is not. This is the most important language. This does not happen, interestingly, in India. Because in India, people are comfortable with English being one of the negotiating languages, the major negotiating language, right? So with this point in mind, I thought, you see, that one of the binaries would be somebody like Jawaharlal Nehru, and on the other side of the binary is somebody like Gandhi, Mahatma Gandhi. Now, yes, remember, my experiments with truth was not written in English. It was later translated into the English language, and today we read it in the English language. I don't think, barring Gujaratis, I think the others, there's nobody who has read it in the original language in which Gandhi wrote it. But even when Gandhi was writing My Experiments with Truth, even at that time, one of his very close friends and associates told Gandhi that, what is this that you're doing? You're writing your autobiography, and that too in English? If you're planning to write it in English, you want to propagate it in English? So Gandhi said that, I'm writing it in Gujarati, and I am writing my autobiography. Yes, but it's a different kind of an autobiography. It is not a factual autobiography. It's an autobiography of my quest, my philosophical quest of understanding myself, the truths about my identity, you see, which is part of the philosophical journey, that is part of the Indian quest. Now, that is a different kind of a binary. I mean, this is the other extreme of the binary. If there is Nehru writing in English, an anglicized Indian who's writing in the English language, trying to discover his self, here is another person who is deeply rooted in the vernacular cultures, who is experimenting with a form which is not natural and indigenous to India. In India, autobiography was not a natural form of writing. It's a westernized form. It has come from the West. Confession and autobiography, I mean, the origin of autobiography is a confession, which is a Christian ritual. It is from confession that autobiography emerges as a major form, literary form later on. And Gandhi chooses autobiography because that is one of the forms in which the search for identity is possible. To understand yourself is possible. And that is exactly what Nehru is doing in Discovery of India, and that is exactly what Gandhi is doing in My Experiments with Truth, but from the opposite directions, right? One is from the vernacular language, from Gujarati, the other from the English language. And here, the co-relationship, in the co-relationship, the negotiating language again becomes English, right? So, this is the simplistic binary of two major extremes of Indian identity, right? Of course, you see, in between these two extremes, you see, there's a lot of complexity that exists. Now, to make this point about the complexity that exists within this binary, between these extremities, I will take up the case of a few other people who came into prominence much later, post-independence in India. And the two whom I'll be taking central in this argument that I'm trying to make about the paradigm shift that happened in English language and literature teaching in India, I take up the figure of somebody like Ganesh Devi. G.N. Devi is after amnesia. And the other figure that I take up is that of Balachandra Nemade, who was a Marathi writer, and his Sahityahil Deshiyata. The reason why I'm taking these two texts and these two writers is, again, you see, the Nehru-Gandhi binary is noticeable here also. Ganesh Devi is a teacher of English. He was a teacher of English at the Amity University, Baroda. And there you see, he slowly shifted from the teaching of English literature and language into an association with the tribal cultures. And today he's deeply involved in that. But when he was still in the primary initial stages of his voyage of self-discovery, he writes that intellectually I feel I feel that I'm like an intellectual Hayavadan. Now, those of you who are familiar with the play of Girish Karnad, Hayavadan, would understand what he's trying to say here. What he's trying to say here is, you see, that Hayavadan has the head of a horse and the body of man, right? Now, what is his identity? Is he a horse? Is he a man? He speaks human language, but his head is that of a horse. Now, here, this is why he says that I feel like an intellectual parent. The ideas that are there inside my head have come from some other place. They have come from the British culture, from the British language. Yet, the blood that is running in the veins in my body is made out of the Indian soil. Now, this is the schism, a division that he's talking about, which is the reason why he feels that I am like an intellectual Hayavadan. Now, this intellectual Hayavadan is applicable to the English language and literature teachers also. You see, we have that entire language and culture inside our head, but the blood that is running in our veins inside our body is the blood that is composed of the Indian soil, the roots of that soil. So there is a schism in our self, in our identity, in our personality, which is the intellectual schism, which is why he feels that he is like an intellectual Hayavadan. Now the same thing is applicable not just to English language, but this is something which in the play Hayavadan you notice is applicable to Sanskrit and the other languages also. Because the Sanskrit Pandit or the Sanskrit poet, because Sanskrit is high up in the hierarchy, you see. The Brahmin is the highest caste, and therefore, you see, the head determines the identity because the head is on the top, whereas the body, which is of the lower castes, shoulders, Kshatriya, and as you go lower down in the body, the other castes come in. They are of a lower hierarchy, lower in the hierarchy. And therefore, you see, the Brahmanical Sanskritic culture, you see, and the hierarchy that it created in our civilization is also being challenged by Girish Kanda there. Because you see, there are these two characters. One character is a Brahmin, the other is a Lohar. He's a lower caste character. And therefore, you see, what is determining the identity? Is it the body or is it the head? So here you see, it is important to understand, you see, the negotiation is through the blood that is running in our veins, which is going to the head also, which is going into the body also. And it is that negotiation which is important today in the new paradigm of literature and language teaching in India, where we have to correlate that which is hierarchically at the top, you see, whatever language it was, whether it is Sanskrit or English, and the language which were marginalized, which were sidelined, which have now come into prominence and need to negotiate with the English language and literature. Right? So when we say that I am a Shakespeare scholar, or I am a scholar of T.S. Eliot or W.B. Yeats, and I teach Shakespeare and Yeats. So I have a very serious problem here, and I'm going to share this little problem that I faced and how it got sorted out. That is where the paradigm shift happens. I'm sure all of you are familiar with the text of the Wasteland by T.S. Eliot. It's one of the texts that is taught everywhere. That is why I'm taking the example of the Wasteland. I am, by the way, of the old school. My research was on T.S. Eliot, my research was on W.B. Yeats, and therefore I loved teaching the Wasteland. And when I was teaching the Wasteland to my students, I used to talk to them about the fertility rites and the fertility rituals that are prevalent in the world. I talked to them about Attis, Adonis, Osiris, the fertility gods. I used to talk to them how there was a curse on the land because of an act of rape by the Fisher King. Now that is part of the fertility rite and ritual. Now this is what I used to teach my students. This was knowledge that I was imparting. This was information that I was imparting to them from another culture, from another language, which they were imbibing through my teaching within their field of knowledge, within their field of information. And they were trying to understand what this fertility rite was that existed in these cultures. I was thinking that I am teaching them about fertility rites, fertility cults, rituals, you see. Can I give them an example of fertility rites and rituals in India? Can I? Is it possible? Because if I'm able to do that, then they will be able to understand what these fertility rites and rituals actually were and how they're significantly related to our lives rather than something that we receive only as information and knowledge, which we use for our answers in examination papers. That is important. So I found that later, when we introduced Indian literature in our courses, which was available to us in the English language. Then I discovered a play, and I'm going to share this with you. The name of the play is Jo Kumar Swami. It is by the Kannada playwright Chandrasekhar Kambar. You all have heard of Girish Karnad, but I don't know whether all of you have heard of Chandrasekhar Kambar. Because Chandrasekhar Kambar has not been translated so much as Girish Karnad. Girish Karnad himself translated his plays. Chandrasekhar Kambar's plays were translated by other people because he was not that proficient himself in the English language as Girish Karnad was. The Chandrasekhar Kambar's play Jokumar Swami is talking about a ritual that still happens in rural Karnataka. It is called the Jo Kumara Hunnive. It is a fertility rite and ritual that happens even today in the month of September in the rural parts of Karnataka. Now, these are fertility rites and rituals which are part of epics, myths, folklore, and therefore need not often be very rational for our understanding. Yet they have significance. And they have significance in the minds and the lives of the rural people who are performing these rites and rituals. In the month of September, in the rural part of Karnataka, they worship a god, a Loki, as a phallic symbol because it represents the god Jokumar Swami, who is the son of Lord Shiva and his wife Ditna Devi. Now, Ditna Devi is a form of Parvati, a ruralized form in rural Karnataka. Jokumar Swami is the son. Like Karthik, he is very, very handsome. Right? And within a week of his birth, now this is myth, this is part of folklore. So don't take it literally or rationally. Within a week of his birth, Jokumar Swami seduces all the women of that village. And when he does that, naturally the men are furious. So they surround Jokumar Swami, cutting him up into pieces, and his blood soaks into the earth. The earth in that particular place has been cursed, and therefore it is sterile. It is like a wasteland where nothing grows, because the curse has fallen on the land because of the evil deeds of the men of that land. And when the blood of Jokumar Swami soaks into that earth, the earth comes back to life. Fruits and flowers grow out of the earth. The curse is removed. So this story from the myth, mythology, of folklore now becomes a part of what is a fertility rite and ritual, where this god, which is a phallic symbol representing Jokumar Swami, the god, is worshipped every year in the month of September. And after the worship, it is distributed. And women who have not had children, who were not able to give birth, they take portions of that board, make it into sabji, and give it to their husbands or boyfriends or lovers, and they fall in love again with the women, and they are able to conceive. Now, that's why I said don't take it rationally. It is a story like a folklore or a ritualistic story from the epics, from the myths. But it has significance for the understanding of what a fertility rite was. So when I was teaching Jokumar Swami, I suddenly realized that they would be able to understand what a fertility rite meant if they could correlate what was happening in Jokumar Swami with what Eliot is trying to talk of in the wasteland. Where the wasteland is cursed because of an act of rape, where the Fisher King enters a chapel and rapes the nuns who are there in that chapel. The curse falls on the land of the Fisher King, and that land becomes barren. It becomes barren. Nothing grows there. It becomes a wasteland. Now that Eliot takes as a symbol of what is going to happen to the modern Western world because of man's greed and because of man's lust, where he wants to get everything which does not even belong to him, where he sort of massacres the land and environment and everything, you see, because of this greed and lust. And women here represent, you see, and so many people are doing environment studies, you see, they correlate with the nature forces of earth, like Parvati is the daughter of the mountains. Similarly, so here the curse falls on Fisher King's land. And how will the curse be removed? The blood of Christ, which was stored secretly by the disciples of Christ when he was crucified, when he fell from his arms, where the nail was driven, was taken in a kind of a grail, a chalice, and hidden. If one of the knights of King Arthur's legends is able to relocate and find that holy grail and bring the blood of Christ, and that blood of Christ falls on the land, that land, the curse will be removed, and it will not be a wasteland anymore. Fruits and flowers will grow in that land. Isn't this similar to the Jokumar Swami ritual? And yet, you see, it is there, and it can be negotiated so that students are able to correlate and understand, you see, two things in two different languages, one in rural Karnataka, you see, and the other in English by T.S. Eliot. And the fertility rite can be understood through this negotiation as not something that is alien to us. It's something that is integral to us as part of our understanding, where this paradigm shift is required in the teaching of literature and language, so that this correlationship can happen. And the time is right for it now. This is what I wanted to talk about primarily. Now here, what is happening, you see, that when we look at the literatures which are there, you see, available to us for our reading, for our understanding, you see, even in our land, you see, Indian literatures which are written in the vernacular languages, Indian literatures which are written in English language. Here, let me give you the example of somebody who's very, very close to my heart. I'm a Bengali, and therefore, naturally, you see, I have a great, great respect for somebody like Rabindranath Tagore. Now, Tagore got the Nobel Prize for Literature because of Gitanjali. Now, Gitanjali was a work that was written in English. No, it was not written originally in English. These were Bengali poems, songs that Tagore was transcreating, not translating, into the English language during a journey in a ship, because these journeys used to be month-long journeys, when one traveled by ship from one land to the other as he was going to England. He wanted to present Rothenstein with these transcreations, as I call it. And that is the time, when he sat in the ship. He was not very well. He was sick. He was ill. He had fever. So he didn't have too much of energy. So he decided that rather than write new poems, let me try to transcreate some of my songs into English. Now that he did that, that transcreation. Now what happens here is, you see, when Rothenstein read it, when T.S. Eliot, when W.B. Yeats was reading it, and they discovered in it a correlationship with the deepest mystic traditions of the Western world, right? Which belonged almost to the time of the pagan rituals and rites in the Western world. And therefore they correlated instantly with that mystic and the philosophical element which was there in Tagore's transcreations of his song. They did not know at that time that these transcreations which Tagore had done had the origins in some of the baul songs that Tagore had listened to when he was visiting the Noida district as a tax collector. When he collected the songs of the bauls, who were fakirs, mendicants, who were minstrels, who sang on the roadside. And there you see, in the elements of the bauls and the fakirs and the minstrels, you see, in those songs, Tagore picked up elements, which he found even in the Upanishads and the Purans. The most sophisticated elements of rituals and rites and beliefs were there at the elementary and fundamental and rooted level of the songs of the bauls and the fakirs. The same thing happens when Arun Kolatkar is talking about the Marathi bhakti poets like Namdev and Tukaram. When we are talking of Kabir Das, at the fundamental and basic level, you see, there is a correlation. Now, for example, you see somebody like Shah Abdul Karim, who's a baul in Bangladesh, when he says that in tantras and mantras I tried to find you, I could not. In shastras I tried to discover you, I went further away from you. Where were you hiding? In the depths of the ocean, in the deep skies? But you were not there in the tantras and mantras or the shastras. Now that is an elementary fundamental level of belief which belongs to the bauls, the fakirs, and even to somebody like Kabir Das or Namdev or Tukaram. And it is the most sophisticated belief system of the Upanishad also. So there's a correlationship. And it is one of the most sophisticated belief systems even in the Western world. No wonder, you see, when they read the transcreations of Tagore's, they correlated instantly to it. You see, because there, at the fundamental level, there was a negotiation of belief and faith, which was possible. So that is exactly what I'm saying, you see. That literatures, languages, whether they are at the rural level or whether they are at the highly sophisticated urban level, correlate. And English often becomes the negotiating language between these. And as teachers of English literature and language, it is our supreme duty to find this correlationship, to discover this negotiation, so that it is somewhere where the global understanding gets possible, where the mind gets liberated, right? I discovered this very interestingly, and I think, I don't know, how much time I have, but then I discovered this interestingly, in a creative writing program that I initiated in the university. Thus, this was just a practical experience, and I'm going to share it with you, and maybe I'll end it after that, and maybe we'll be open to some discussion and question and answers if possible after this, right? Now here, what happened is, you see, that I had this group of students who were writers also, who used to write. Now, some of them were from a convent school background, meaning, that they were extremely well versed in the English language. And some of them, especially if you are familiar with the Allahabad background, you see, many of them were from a rural background where they were from the vernacular schools in the rural parts of Uttar Pradesh, and they had a very, very poor knowledge of the English language. But they were extremely adept in the dialects of the region and in Hindi or Urdu or in Bhojpuri or Maithili and some of these other dialects. So I noticed, you see, that there was a complex that these students from the rural background suffered from. And that complex was the lack of knowledge of English. Because in the hierarchy of languages and knowledges, English was at the top, and their own mother tongues and dialects and languages were somewhere in the bottom. So despite the fact that they were so well versed in their dialects, they felt that they had not achieved anything in their lives. So till they could write in English, they felt that they had not achieved anything in their lives. So what were the poems that they gave me in the creative writing workshop and program? They gave me bad rehashes of William Wordsworth that they had studied in their class. Extremely grammatically wrong William Wordsworth was presented to me as great poetry that they had written. And I sincerely asked them not to write in English. I said that why don't you write in your mother tongue? Why don't you write in the dialect which you are used to? And they gave me some of the most wonderful creative poems that they wrote in their dialects. And I told them, these are so beautiful. These can be translated by somebody who's adept in English into the English language for you. But it's good that you've written it in your mother tongue. But the opposite problem was there with the convent school students. They were writing good English, but they were totally unfamiliar with their own roots, with the basics, the fundamental languages that was part of their identity. They were unfamiliar with that. And therefore, what they were writing was very, very superficial, very good, but superficially good. That didn't have the depth. What was required, and which is what I was trying to tell them, was that there has to be a non-hierarchical negotiation between these people from the rural background, adept in their mother tongues, and these people from convent schools, urban students, who could actually correlate through translations and translations of their works. And something very rich can happen out of that negotiation between the languages. Therefore, this is the point that I'm trying to make. English language and literature teaching today cannot remain in that state of false colonial hierarchy that once was theirs. We have to redefine it in new terms. And today the new terms, the new paradigms of English language teaching and English literature teaching will only be comparative culture studies, translation studies, which have to become the central features of this new teaching of English literature and language. That is my major point that I'm trying to make through all that I have been trying to say. It is this paradigm shift that is required. And I don't know, I have tried to share my experience. I've tried to present things in as subjective a manner as possible. I don't believe in scholastic presentations. I believe in direct ways in which one can talk of, right? If I remember correctly, there are these famous lines from T.S. Eliot, and I shall end with that because that is what is happening today in this modern world. Much of the paradigm shift in the teaching of language as well as literature and every subject that has happened over these last 2 years or 3 years is that we are moving into the online mode. Now here, I am talking to a screen. I can see a few faces and I'm doing that. But my personality, my body language, which communicates might be more than my words do, is important when I'm trying to communicate in a class. Now that does not happen here. That never happens here. It's a very frustrating experience, for a person like me who's involved with the performative arts. I'm a theater person also. I've been doing theater, and theater requires the language of the body besides the language of words. It is not only my words that speak, it is my body that speaks. My face will speak, my eyes speak, everything speaks. Now, this is what is important, where we have to move out of the screen back again into the physical world. That paradigm shift, where we have shifted from the real world into the screen world, has to go back to the real world again, That is another major paradigm shift, which is required post-COVID. We have to get back into the real world. I remember the lines of T.S. Eliot with which I began. Where is the wisdom that we have lost in knowledge? And where is the knowledge that we have lost in information? You see, this is from the choruses from The Rock by T.S. Eliot. And I feel that these lines are very central to what I've been trying to say. What are we trying to impart, whether we are teaching English language or literature today? In a highly digitalized world, are we trying to remain only at the level of information? Where is the wisdom that we have lost in knowledge? And where is the knowledge that we have lost in information? The significance of these lines come out today very strongly when we are thinking in terms of paradigm shifts. We have to shift back into the real world. The world where we move beyond information into the world of knowledge and beyond knowledge into the world of wisdom. Because literature as well as language are only methods of this movement from information to knowledge to wisdom. And whatever paradigm shifts that we think of has to think in terms of such negotiations which will be able to bring this back again. Thank you. I think, there's no point in just extending things, when you don't have much to say after a certain point of time. So I will keep it open to a discussion if possible. If not, then it ends, right? Okay, sure. Thank you. Thank you, Surabhi, for giving me this opportunity to speak and communicate.
Thank you so much, sir. Now it is open for discussion. In case you have questions, you can put it in the chat box or raise your hand. And by the time, sir, just excuse me for a minute.
Sure, sure.
Okay, so by the time I think people are, okay, Jibu sir is here, yes.
Sir, my question is related to what you have said about reinventing ourselves as English literature teachers. Now we also have our post NAP NEP 2020,
Right.
where English language is no more a mandatory subject in school.
Right.
And so even though the three language formula is continued, the English language is not mandatory as this was the case with the last two NEPs. So now, and you also said about how the status of English has to be changed and reversed. So how do you see the the prospects of English language studies post NEP and all
Right.
these?
I first, as I said it right in the beginning, in many ways, I still belong to the old world, right? Okay. Though I have my reservations about what that old world was, because I did a critique of the entire British kind of orientation which was there in the English language. But similarly, as there is a critique of the British thing, that colonial legacy part. Similarly, there is also a critique of the extreme puristic nativistic stance, where we dismiss the English language and don't. I mean, we remove the mandatory status. Now that is going to reduce our understanding of things in the future. Therefore, what I personally would be saying would be a critique of the NEP thing. That if the NEP has been insisting on this, which it has been, right, it is a lacuna. And it is not necessary that we say yes to it all the time. We have to keep certain things there, and which are important even today. And that is there, you see, that English still remains the negotiating language between us and the world, right? We cannot dismiss that. And if we dismiss that, we are reducing our understanding of a lot of things, and in the future, this will show, right? So therefore, you see, I am not for it, frankly speaking. I think that English should remain as a very major language, and it still should have that mandatory status, because it will give access to the student to a world, which will go if that is not mandatory. That access is important, it is required. That's right. That's what I feel. Right? But thank you. That was a wonderful question. Yeah, I feel that such things have to be really sort of probed, and one has to look at it in a very clear sight.
If I may ask a question.
Sure.
Um, Thank you so much for what you've said now. I was in continuation with that, in both during the pandemic time and the post-pandemic time, for teaching theater, because after all, it is a performance art. It has been very difficult for us to transition from something which we are performing, as you say, you're talking to a black box, to something which is practical, which is not so much theoretical as an explanation of it. And we are seeing that there is a continuity of the same thing right now, because half of it is sometimes we are opting for hybrid modes of teaching. And how would we go about teaching something like theater, which transcends language also at times, because gesture, so it becomes very difficult for us. So if you could, give us some of your thoughts on that.
Right. Okay. What I'll do is, rather than give my thoughts, I'll give you my experience, right? Because you see, this is something that is not at the level of thoughts. This is something at the level of experience. I mean, we were doing 3 plays, okay? Because I'm also the coordinator of the Center for Film and Theatre in the University of Allahabad and Media Studies as well. So here, we were doing 3 plays. One was this play called Thus Spake Surpanakha, So Said Shakuni by Poili Gupta. We were doing Sankranti by Buddhadev Bose, and we were doing Halla Bol of Sardar Hashmi. There were 3 plays. And the 2 plays we were thinking of proscenium, and the third one we were doing in the street theater form, right? Now the thing is, we were doing it in the year 2019, and we were supposed to perform in 2020 March. But that is the time when the pandemic first showed its major phase. So we had to sort of stopped everything. We stopped the rehearsal. We couldn't rehearse because you see everybody was scared at that time of even coming to a place together physically, right? Which is required for a rehearsal, that we have to be all there, right? So that space we had to abandon, right? We forgot about it. We forgot about it completely for 1 year, right? Because we said that we will do it either physically, we'll do it on the stage, or we'll not do it. But in the meantime, I noticed, you see, that so many theater groups were doing them, you see, digitally, you see, their performances. But it was so frustrating to even see it, because it didn't have that three-dimensional quality. It didn't have that projection out into the audience, which is essential for theater. But then, slowly we tried again, when in the next year again, there was a lull in the pandemic. We again began rehearsal. We again had to abandon it, right? Finally, you see, we did it in this year, in the month of March, right? When actually the things had got quite normal after that time. So we did it. But then, you see, I noticed something else. That, you see, in the meantime, we had discovered some of the advantages of the digitalized world also, right? And because I was coordinating the Center for Film and Theatre and also the media studies thing, so there was this thing, where I was wondering, that, you see, theater is a different way, films are a different way. Now, because we have the technical advantage of films also in the Center for Film and Theatre, why not use it? So I discovered, I mean, earlier, when we did plays, we would do it in an auditorium, right? And some amateurish person would come with a camera, video camera, and make a video out of that, where half the time you couldn't hear anything, half the time you couldn't see the facial expressions of the people, right? So we got the disadvantage of that kind of a system. But here, because we had film people there, you see, who said that, okay, we'll have a rehearsal, not an actual show, because you see, actually this kind of filming would disturb the audience also, because they will be moving around with the camera, So while the play is going as if it is a final performance, but it's actually a rehearsal, which is like a dress rehearsal with makeup, we shall make a kind of a film of the entire performance. And we shall move around with the camera, take close-ups of the faces, distance the camera, again go close, do all that, And then I discovered, the advantage that, you see, we did the plays, of course, on stage also, but we were able to get a kind of a performance in camera and into the digital world, which sort of highlighted certain things in a far greater way than they would have been highlighted even in a performance. There was something that was a close up of a face, which really even showed, even the last wrinkle, or where the nose crinkled a little bit, or somebody's lip twisted a little, Now all that is a very major thing. In films, it's a normal thing. But then, when it's a theater performance and somebody is able to capture that, that is quite an experience. So we got the advantage of that. And we decided, let us put it on YouTube also. That means the actual show plus the YouTube thing. So get the best of both the worlds. So that is exactly what I'm trying to say. That, you see, another world exposed itself to us during the time of the pandemic. We suddenly realized, you see, the advantages of that world also, which we never knew existed. And once you realize the advantages of that world, and we can make the two things harmonize, then we get a perhaps, something, which we didn't have earlier, which might work out to be of a greater satisfaction than what it used to be, might not, but still it is something to be seen. They're still experimenting with it. So I thought that let me share that with you. So these are the things, that I experienced with. So rather than give you an answer, I really don't have an answer for it right now. It's still at the stage of trying to find out, what works and what doesn't work, right? So this is what we did. And if you are interested, I could send you the YouTube links, and you can see these plays, and you'll understand
Thank you. That
exactly
would be wonderful, because
Sure,
I think in the last year they did come up as an OTT platform of all Bengali plays, actually.
right.
Starting with Anlal plays and Urubhangam and all of those were all.
Yes, I know. I remember I saw this happen several years back in Doordarshan, and that was well before the pandemic and all these things. I don't know whether you saw it.
Prasar
It
Bharati
was-
Archives.
yeah, this was Rukmavati Ki Haveli, the House of Bernarda Alba by Ibsen, and also you see Little Eyolf, you see of Ibsen. These were the plays, and there was a third play which was by Strindberg, which I think Father. These were done by Govind Nihalani and Shyam Benegal for the stage. And this kind of a camera usage was there, where Doordarshan actually showed those plays in performance, and it was very, very effective even at that time, right? I try to find it out, if it is there. And I remember even Shauli Mitra's Nathapati Anadbat, there was a very good kind of a filming of that, performance which was done, which had the advantages of film and theater both placed together, right? That's it.
Thank you so much.
Right. Yes, wonderful questions coming up. I'm
Thank you,
really
sir.
enjoying
No,
myself.
we have one more question from
Sure.
Dr. Singh.
Okay, sure. Please.
First of all, sir, I would like to extend my heartfelt thanks to come to
Right.
this, platform and to
Okay.
give us such enlightening lecture. It has always been very mesmerizing to hear you, your insightful thought. You have been always, new with your experience and with your innovative ideas. Again, sir, I would like to just ask you a question. Like you have, talked about being a little critical of the British world. I have been a literary scholar. I have studied, under you. You have been you will be always remain my guide. But this has always struck me that, one of the post-colonial critique, he was an Englishman, I'm forgetting his name. He stated that establishment of English department, any colonial country is always reestablishing the Occidental world, and which is berefting us from our roots. So what you have to say about it?
No, that is exactly what I was trying to say. You see that what happens is, that when we have a very strong Brit literature content, in our courses, it is okay, it began like that, when the Britishers were here, they wanted to introduce British studies, British literature as their literature, which we should understand and study. But it is meaningless today, because we have to somehow, correlate our realities, which I find, often the students are unable to do. They are studying it as course subjects, which they have to write for an examination. Now, that is not a very, very happy experience for a teacher, where you are teaching literature and you feel, that this is merely at the level of information that I'm imparting for an examination. You would also like to see, how literature becomes a mean for correlationship of cultures, right? Where the English language becomes, as I tried to say, a negotiating language, between cultures, which is why, these changes are required, because you can't do away with the English departments anymore, right? You can't do away with the English. But then you see, at the same time, you have to sort of reinvent the English department, create the new paradigms as your workshop is trying to. Yes, please.
Can I interrupt for a minute?
Sure, please.
Professor, it was so enlightening to hear your negotiation. From years when I have been not my expertise, but my thirst has always been on poetry and romanticism.
Right.
I always found in my classes that when they studied Williams, Wordsworth, or when they studied nature as, described by the lake poets, for students who had never been to England or were not,
right,
who were not in touch with the topography of the Lake District and the karst scenery,
right.
I had to relate to our fields in India, to our nature and to our topography in India, to make them understand, the very spirit of that nature as described by the Romantic poets, and the imagination also. So, our classes, the students got to be very, very acclimatized with what was ground reality in India. and nature writers in India as well.
Right.
And I found that they could understand and correlate with the romantic writers or the writers of the Lake District far better.
Right.
And
Absolutely.
of course, my idea was to make it more relevant. But definitely, I think that was a part of the process of the negotiation between the reality on our grounds where we stay and the lessons that we were teaching to them, which were in a referral country where they had never stepped in.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
So their imagination couldn't run riot to understand the Lake District or the caste scenery as described.
Right.
And the students started correlating, with the tunnel and the caste scenery in Assam, or the solitary reaper. I said, look at the fields of paddy and look at the fields, and then you will know how the crops are reaped with the sickle, And immediately they said, Hasiya, yes. I said, of course, that's a sickle.
That's right, absolutely.
And that negotiation is a must for the teacher to bring, to clarify the notions and the context of that theory into their systems.
Right, absolutely.
So I think what you said was very, very relevant. And thank you so much. It was like a boost to my confidence. And what I've been telling my teachers that, you can't just describe and try to show them on the videos or things. You have to show them the videos of India.
Yeah, absolutely.
Correlate,
absolutely.
So that was wonderful. I really feel good after listening to your talk today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It
Thank
feels so good, to get responses like this, It really makes me feel, that we are absolutely being able to correlate and negotiate at some level, when we talk like this.
Yeah. And when I write my poems, because of our religious background, we have been, brought up by our Anglo-Indian nuns.
Yes.
And so the intermix of Ram Katha, of Bible, of the Genesis, and also the spiritual, preachings of our Bhakti saints, and mixing the two in my poems. A lot of people ask, what do you mean by this? And I said, no, I mean, my mental thinking is all in English. So they laugh and they say, you dream in English? I said, yes, I dream in English, but I can't help being an Indian of what I see in reality.
Yes.
And that's where the connectivity is definitely needed for our students to learn and feel confident about.
Yes. You see, I remember, that when I was talking about the Tom the Lunatic or Crazy Jane in W.B. Yeats, I was trying to find correlationships in the Indian context, and then I thought, that many of the bowls and the fakirs of India, they are also like Tom the Lunatic,
Exactly.
Basically, they're like those minstrels, So when you correlate with that, that's easier for them to understand,
Exactly.
That's the way it
Thank
happens.
you.
Thank you, Professor Ray.
Just over that. That was Professor Dr. K.K. Ray, who's the director of the Amity School of Languages, Lucknow. So she heads that.
Okay.
Right. There. And I think what man just spoke of was another paradigm shift.
Right, absolutely.
Bringing and visualizing England and the Lake District and representing it through our own Indian piece. I just had a general observation, maybe I could call it a question. Something that has troubled me always when I see the shifting sands of English, so to say, coming again from that, being an old timer and coming from that purist tradition of the convent nuns and, our teachers were Irish nuns as it happened. So it has taken some time. And to take a leaf out of the kind of question that Jibu also articulated, there's been so much change, even before the NEP, if I may say so. So when we talk of communicating and what you spoke about, your topic of negotiating between languages and cultures.
Right.
Somewhere I feel, and though you're right, we need to come out of that colonial hierarchy, as you called it, and use English as a language of negotiation. So we are redefining every time. But to what extent, I want to know, is this redefinition applicable or allowed, possibly, to be permitted? For example, let me just take one aspect of the spoken language. I see a lot of mockery being made of, the old time pronunciation and giving a lot of emphasis. And youngsters always wonder, why does it matter? Why is it important as long as you are understood?
Right.
And you are understood any which way.
Right.
So where can we draw the line? I mean, how far can you say we can compromise on pronunciation 20% of the way, or 30% or less, or what?
I don't think I'll be able to, I have an answer to about the percentage part, but that what I can say is, that, we can't do without it also, because we have to somewhere, correlate, between, for example, I remember, sometimes, the greatest flashes of creative genius happen, when things happen. I mean, I remember when Abraham Al-Qazi, the theater director, was doing Julius Caesar in Hindi, right? There was this scene, which all of us are very familiar with, where when Brutus stabs Caesar, right? And Caesar says, et tu Brute, then falls Caesar, right? So Al-Qazi was wondering, what to do here, what will Caesar say? And it was in a flash that it came to him. Ye tu Brutus. Ye et tu. Ye tu Brutus. Where Caesar gira, right? Okay. So what I feel is, that we today are at a very, very important juncture where, and especially I understand it, because of my experience with theater. In theater, you will notice, that what is happening is, that in theater, you are not able to write theater in English anymore, because always the grammatically correct English has to be there. In poetry you can do it, in fiction you can do it, but in theater, if there is a character who belongs to a class or a category of India, who cannot speak right English, you cannot make that person speak right English on stage, then that will be ridiculous. It will be the opposite, that here, how is this fellow speaking right English? How is this fellow speaking grammatically correct English? So that becomes a laughing matter, So, it is important, that distorted English also has to be taken as part of this whole thing. Therefore, I have very strong resentment against that poem by Nizim Ezekiel, Pushpati, because there, there is ridiculing of that English. We will have to remember, that here we will speak that English without being ridiculed. African Americans speak their kind of English, happily and proudly in the United States of America. Nobody says that this is wrong English. That is the way they have accommodated English. They have transformed English to suit their culture. We have to also get over the colonial hangover and do that to English. That
so
where we are able to
already, I think we are doing it every day. We have English in such a big way.
Exactly. So that is what we have to continue doing, in a much more affirmative manner. That is what my negotiation is all about.
I would also like to add over there, Professor Roy, is that we have to look at the audience when we are performing.
Yes.
And most of the audience who are theater lovers may not be very good English lovers.
Absolutely.
And this hybridity of English with mixing of words, like English words or mixing with Tamil words, they carry their own connotations and are better understood by our spectators. Absolutely. So when we have theater here and our students write their own scripts, and they restructure the plays into some sort of a mixed language, to be more appealing for the audience to get the meaning, at the rock bottom. And I feel English is like the Ganges, Ganga ki tarah, it assimilates all. But the crunch of it is making a dent with its own meanings to the people who hear it.
Absolutely.
And that's why I feel English is a very, very, accepting language
Yes.
Because like the Ganges, it accepts trash, it accepts dirt, it accepts pure water, and yet it is so very well venerated.
True.
And that is the beauty of English. Of course, since we've been brought up in a very colonial sort of teaching in our days, where the pronunciation mattered so much, the spellings mattered so much, the exact words mattered, and our nuns laid so much stress on vocabulary. Of course, that was a language. Vocabulary was more of intelligence, but today all that has taken a back seat.
Yeah, absolutely.
In certain ways, that has taken a back seat, but that back seat has made the language more universal.
Right.
More democratic.
Totally.
And more accepting, and also taken away the diffidence that you do not know English language.
Right. It's very important.
Which is a very big landmark, because our students' confidence rests so much on the knowledge of the language as being smart, even if they're street smart. Superficial students who are street smart and they think high and the latest languages, if they speak that, then they are the ones who are cream on cat's whiskers. But those who come from vernaculars have a better grammatical writing skill, but a poor oral skill.
Absolutely.
And that's where this movement of language and literature teaching has to be considered when we have a group of students who have come from all sorts of areas and all sorts of states and backgrounds, and who, some of the teachers, some of the students have learned onion as, onion.
Yes, of course.
Yum, but we cannot ridicule them.
Yes, absolutely.
And that is the biggest, I think that's the biggest responsibility of the English teacher, to ingrain confidence, taking away the diffidence just because you do not know English.
Yeah, absolutely. That's right. That's the point that I was also trying to make. Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Right. Yeah.
And also the shift from the superiority of literature to communicative English.
Right. Absolutely.
So this shift for maybe placement or whatever you say, where they are looking at your communication more than your literary knowledge and text.
Yeah. Absolutely.
It's helpful for them.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Prasad and Professor Ray, for your inputs. We have another question in the chat box by one of our research scholars. I would like to know your opinion on this topic, that these days a lot of regional literature is being written and translated in English language to increase the readership. I think he's asking this question specific to translation.
Okay.
So this regional literature is getting translated in English language to increase the readership and to make the native culture, literature, and past to be conveyed to the contemporary readers of literature.
Right.
Are there more reasons to this? Is it not affecting the same regional literature negatively, as translated version can never carry the essence of the original?
No, but then you see, I mean, number one, the thing that this question implies is, that the readership is increasing, right? Now, what are those readers getting out of that translation, right? I mean, I personally feel, that there are certain very language and culture specific things, which somehow are not translatable in that sense. So it can never be exactly equivalent, right? But then also we have to also consider the fact that there is no other way in which we would otherwise get access to that literature. I mean, those for whom that language is not a language that's a known language, right? For example, I would never have been able to read Jokumar Swami in Kannada, right? In that rural Karnataka, Kannada form. I would never have it. And yet, you see, when I read it in English, I would not agree that we don't get the essence. We do get the essence. I mean, it is the essence we get, but maybe sometimes, some of the nuances might escape us, at some language specific nuances. That is only possible from the mother language, in the original language. But it is not that we don't get the essence. We do get the essence. It is not that we are not able to understand what that particular writer has been trying to say through that poem or through that play or through that work of fiction. We do get it to a large extent, but then we don't have an alternative. So this is the only way out. So this is where you see this entire process of negotiation becomes important, because we have to continue with this negotiation rather than stop it. Because you see, that is the only way in which, that vaster world understanding and world culture can evolve. Otherwise, you're putting an end to it. That's what. And that is where the English language becomes an important medium. That's the only medium actually today, which is expanding the horizons for us, right? So I would feel that this has to continue rather than, and there's no limit to it. It will happen. There will be some places where we'll not be able to communicate the nuances, and yet, the experiment has to continue, right?
Yes, thank you so much. I hope, Rituraj, you are satisfied with the answer and you had whatever you were expecting out of this question. I mean, I think Sir has categorically mentioned this as his concluding remarks while talking about the paradigmatic shift, because he said that false colonial hierarchy can never lead us anywhere. So we have to redefine it. We have to redefine it through comparative cultural studies, through translation studies. So that is the crux of the whole, discussion on what shift is coming up and how we have to look at this negotiation in language. So thank you so much, sir, for your insightful session.
Yeah.
And it is such a wonderful day. Today is Guru Purnima, and both the scholar and the guide. So I wish Guru
Yeah,
Purnima
it's good to see Reena there. Yeah. I believe she just came to Delhi today, right? She reached Delhi today. Good to see her. Yeah. Wonderful. Yeah.
So good teachers, they don't